Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light, illuminated monuments to everything I was leaving behind. Each cardboard box sat heavy, not just with the physical weight of books in China and decades of accumulated living, but with the dense gravity of memory. This house, the one Richard and I had poured our lives into, the one where the scuff marks on the baseboards told stories of tricycle collisions and runaway puppies, was emptying. And so, it felt, was I downsizing, they called it. A sensible step, but sensible felt like sandpaper against my raw heart. Richard was gone, the silence in these high-ceilinged rooms a constant, echoing reminder. The children were grown, flown, busy building lives that rarely intersected with the quiet cul-de-sac where I now rattled around like a lone marble in a too-large box. Moving felt less like a step forward and more like admitting defeat, conceding that the life I knew was well and truly over. My back ached just looking at the stacks, a dull throb that mirrored the ache behind my ribs. Doctor's orders were clear: no heavy lifting. Degenerative discs, a fancy term for getting older and carrying too much for too long. Not just boxes, I suppose. So I needed help, real help. Not just hired hands, though I knew I'd need those for the furniture, but help with the stuff. The sorting, the deciding, the careful wrapping of fragile memories. Someone who understood that the chipped teacup wasn't just a teacup, but a relic from a Sunday morning pancake tradition. Someone who might listen just for a moment to the story behind it. My daughter Sarah was overseas, knee-deep in a work project she couldn't leave. That left Mark, my son. My successful, driven, always on the move Mark. He lived only an hour away, a fact that felt both comforting and increasingly irrelevant. His visits were brief, scheduled events, sandwiched between conference calls and client dinners. He'd stride in, all expensive suit and strained smile, ask superficial questions without waiting for the answers, and check his watch constantly. But he was my son. Surely for this, for helping his mother dismantle the remnants of their shared past, he could find a few hours. I picked up the phone, the familiar weight of it feeling heavier today. I rehearsed the words in my head, trying to sound capable, not needy. Casual, just asking for a little favor. The line clicked and his voice, clipped and efficient, answered. Mom, everything okay? Concern, yes, but tinged with impatience, the underlying question always, is this urgent? I explained about the move, the boxes, the doctor's orders. I kept my voice light, deliberately downplaying the emotional tsunami threatening to breach my carefully constructed dam. I was just wondering, sweetheart, I began, adding the slight tremor I couldn't quite control, if you might have a free Saturday coming up, just for a few hours, to help me get some of these heavier boxes sorted and maybe down to the garage. There was a pause. I could almost hear the mental gears turning, the calculation of time versus obligation. I pictured him glancing at his phone calendar, his brow furrowed in concentration. Was I just another appointment to be squeezed in? Oh, Mom, he finally said, his voice smooth, reassuring. Too reassuring. Of course you need help, don't worry about a thing. Seriously, leave it to me, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Saturday morning, consider it handled. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought tears. He understood, he'd be here. Oh, Mark, thank you, I breathed. It would mean so much. Anything for you, Mom, he replied easily. Just focus on the sorting, I'll handle the muscle, consider it done. He hung up before I could say anything else, leaving me with a dial tone and a fragile bubble of hope. He said he'd handle it. He said he'd be here, my son. The week leading up to Saturday crawled by, each day marked by more packing tape, more bubble wrap, more sharp pangs of nostalgia. I sorted through photo albums, lingered over Richard's old sweaters, boxed up the physical evidence of a life lived fully if imperfectly. Each item whispered a story, a memory I tucked away carefully, hoping Mark might help me carry them, literally and figuratively. I imagined us working side by side, maybe sharing a laugh over some forgotten childhood drawing, perhaps a quiet moment of understanding passing between us amidst the dust and boxes. It felt important, this shared task, a way to reconnect, to bridge the growing distance that seemed to yawn between his fast-paced world and my quiet one. I bought his favorite biscuits, the expensive chocolate ones he'd loved as a boy, and made sure the coffee machine was ready. A small offering, a mother's gesture of welcome. I woke early on Saturday, the house filled with that particular stillness that precedes expected company. Sunlight streamed through the living room window, illuminating the stacked boxes like actors waiting for their cue on a stage. 9 a.m. ticked closer. Then 9:15. My hope began to fray around the edges, replaced by a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. Mark was punctual, obsessively so. This wasn't like him. Unless handling it meant something different than I'd assumed. The doorbell finally chimed at 9:30. Not Mark's usual decisive double ring, but a single, polite press. My heart sank even before I reached the door. I smoothed down my apron, took a deep breath, and opened it. Standing on my porch was not my tall, suited son, but a small, unfamiliar woman in a neat blue uniform carrying a professional cleaning caddy. She offered a hesitant smile. Good morning, she said, her accent lightly Spanish. I am Maria, from Helping Hands Agency. Mr. Johnson sent me for the boxes. Mr. Johnson, not Mark, not my son, Mr. Johnson. The name he used professionally, the name on his impressive business cards. He hadn't sent himself, he had outsourced the task, he had sent a maid. The fragile bubble of hope didn't just deflate, it shattered, the shards piercing straight through me. I must have looked utterly bewildered, speechless, because Maria's smile faltered slightly. Is this not the right time? She asked uncertainly. I forced my lips into some semblance of a smile, the muscles feeling stiff and unfamiliar. No, I managed, my voice thin. It's expected, please come in. I stepped aside numb as Maria entered the house, her eyes taking in the landscape of boxes with professional detachment. She wasn't here to share memories or offer comfort. She was here to do a job my own son couldn't or wouldn't do himself. He hadn't handled it by being here, by offering his time, his presence. He had handled it with money, with efficiency, dispatching a stranger to deal with the physical manifestation of our family history. The chocolate biscuits suddenly seemed pathetic, mocking me from the kitchen counter. The silence in the house returned, but now it wasn't just empty, it was filled with the deafening roar of my own disappointment. Maria was efficient, I had to give her that. She assessed the situation with a practiced eye, asked clarifying questions about what needed packing, what needed moving downstairs, her manner polite and professional. She didn't pry, didn't offer unwanted sympathy. She simply got to work, tapping boxes with brisk, competent movements, lifting the smaller ones with surprising strength. I trailed behind her, feeling like a ghost in my own home, pointing numbly towards stacks, murmuring instructions that felt utterly meaningless. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I wasn't supposed to be directing a stranger, I was supposed to be working alongside my son. Each rip of the packing tape sounded like a tear in the fabric of our relationship. I watched Maria carefully wrap the chipped teacup, her movements gentle but impersonal. She didn't know its story. She couldn't. To her, it was just another object to be secured for transport. To me, it was Sunday mornings, Richard laughing, sticky little fingers reaching for syrupy pancakes. The contrast was a physical pain. Was this how Mark saw my life, my memories, just inconvenient clutter to be dealt with as quickly and efficiently as possible? Hire someone. Problem solved. I retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment. Leaning against the counter, I stared at the phone. Should I call him, demand an explanation, yell, plead? What would be the point? He'd have a perfectly logical, reasonable explanation. He was busy. He had an important meeting shift. This was better, Mom, more efficient. She's a professional. He wouldn't understand that efficiency wasn't the point. That his presence, his effort, that was what I needed. That asking for help moving boxes was code for I miss you. For I need to know I still matter. For please help me carry this weight because I can't do it alone. I remembered countless other times, small slights, missed birthdays explained away with expensive gifts sent by courier, brief visits where his attention was clearly elsewhere. The time he promised to help me clear out Richard's clothes, only to cancel last minute because of a client emergency, suggesting I just donate everything. Easier that way, less messy, less time-consuming. He always chose the path of least emotional resistance, the one that could be solved with his checkbook rather than his time. He built walls of success and efficiency around himself, and I was always on the outside, looking in, holding on to the naive hope that one day he'd lower the drawbridge. Today felt like he hadn't just kept the drawbridge up, he'd bricked up the doorway entirely. He hadn't just delegated a task, he delegated his role as a son. The quiet strength I usually prided myself on felt brittle, ready to crumble. Underneath the hurt, something else began to stir, a slow, cold burn of anger, not explosive rage, but a deep, hardening resentment. He thought this was just about lifting boxes. He thought he could dismiss my need, my history, with a paid service. Fine. Maria worked steadily through the morning. She cleared the designated piles, labeling boxes with neat black marker. Kitchen fragile, book study, linens upstairs hall. Each label felt like another small erasure of the life lived here. These weren't just linens, they were the sheets I'd nursed him in when he had the flu, the tablecloth used for countless family dinners. But to the world, to the movers, perhaps even to Mark, they were just linens. Maria paused around lunchtime, politely declining my offer of a sandwich. She'd brought her own. She ate quickly, tidily in the kitchen while I sat in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of laughter and conversation, the silence thick with unspoken words. I watched her through the doorway. She seemed kind, focused on her work, occasionally humming softly to herself. She caught my eye once and offered another small, hesitant smile. Was she used to this? Being sent into homes filled with unspoken sadness and familial dysfunction? Perhaps she saw more than she let on. Did she see the portrait of Mark on the mantelpiece, a younger, smiling version from his university graduation, and connect him to the Mr. Johnson who had hired her? Did she wonder why he wasn't here himself, or was it just another job, another house, another set of boxes? It didn't matter, I realized. Her perception wasn't the issue. The issue was Mark. The issue was the profound disconnect, the chasm that had opened up between his understanding of help and my need for connection. He saw a logistical problem: mom needs boxes moved. Solution: hire someone qualified, efficient. Done. He didn't see the emotional subtext, the plea for his time, the significance of the task itself. He thought he was being helpful, generous even, by providing a professional. The irony was bitter. He'd paid someone else to do the very thing that might have started to repair the fraying threads between us. He put a price tag on filial duty and outsourced it. Anger I'd felt earlier began to coalesce, sharpen. It wasn't just hurt anymore, it was a cold, clear realization. He didn't value my time, my feelings, or the shared history these boxes represented. He saw it as an inconvenience, a chore to be managed. And if it was just a service, a transaction, well, transactions came with invoices. The thought sparked, unexpected and sharp. An invoice, not just for Maria's time though, that too. An invoice for the dismissal, for the delegation of care. For the emotional labor he'd refused to perform. It was absurd, of course. Petty, maybe, but the idea took root, a tiny seed of defiance in the barren ground of my disappointment. Why shouldn't he pay? He'd already decided this was a financial transaction, hadn't he? He put a monetary value on the help I needed. Maybe it was time I did the same. Maybe it was time I sent him the bill for the real cost of his absence. As Maria continued her work, moving with quiet efficiency through the rooms that held the echoes of my life, my mind was no longer numb. It was working, planning, fueled by that cold, steady anger. I started mentally drafting the invoice, line by painful line. Item 1: professional organizer packer, 4 hours at agency rate. That was the easy part. The tangible cost Mark had already implicitly acknowledged by hearing her. But that wasn't the real charge. The real charge was harder to quantify, yet infinitely more significant. Item: failure to fulfill filial obligation. Item: emotional labor requested but declined. Item: devaluation of mother's request for personal connection. Item: outsourcing of familial responsibility. How did you put a price on that? You couldn't, not really. But the act of writing it down, of itemizing the neglect, felt like reclaiming some small measure of power. It was a way to articulate the hurt in a language he might, just might understand, the language of transactions, of costs incurred. I thought about all the times I had put his needs first, the sacrifices made quietly without fanfare. The sleepless nights when he was sick, the scraped knees kissed better, the school projects I'd stayed up late helping with, the tuition fees painstakingly saved for, the endless emotional support freely given. None of that had ever come with an invoice. It was given out of love, out of maternal duty, freely and without expectation of repayment. But this felt different. This wasn't about asking for gratitude for the past, it was about demanding recognition for the present hurt. He had reduced my need for connection to a line item on his budget, a problem solvable with cash. Very well, let him see the bill. Maria finished stacking the last box in the garage precisely at 1:30 p.m. 4 hours. She wiped her hands on a cloth, surveyed her work, and turned to me. I believe that is everything you asked for, Mrs. Davison? She asked, her professional mask firmly in place. I looked around. The living room was strangely bare, the boxes containing my life now relegated to the cold concrete floor of the garage, ready for the movers. Ready for the next, impersonal stage of this dismantling. Yes, Maria, I said, my voice steadier now. Thank you, you were very efficient. She nodded, accepting the compliment with practiced neutrality. I walked to my purse, my movements deliberate. I took out the cash I'd set aside, money I'd budgeted carefully for the movers, now partially depleted by Mark. Help. I counted out the amount the agency had quoted, plus a small tip. Her work was excellent, she deserved it. It wasn't her fault her presence felt like salt in a wound. She accepted the money with a quiet thank you, Mrs. Davison, tucked it away, gathered her caddy, and let herself out. The click of the front door echoed in the sudden, profound silence. I was alone again, surrounded by the negative space where my belongings, my memories used to be. The house felt vast, hollow. The scent of Maria's lemon-scented cleaner faintly lingered, a sterile reminder of the transaction that had just occurred. I walked back to the kitchen, ignoring the untouched chocolate biscuits. I sat down at the old oak table, the one where countless family meals had been shared, where homework was done, where tears were shed and laughter roared. I pulled out a piece of plain white paper and a pen. My hand was steady as I began to write. Invoice, I wrote at the top. To Mark Johnson, from Evelyn Davison. Beneath our names, I listed the first item clearly. Services rendered, packing and box relocation assistance, Saturday, October 14th. Provided by Helping Hands Agency as arranged by client. I detailed the hours and the agency rate I'd confirmed with Maria before she left. Then I paused. How to phrase the rest? I couldn't literally bill for heartbreak, but I could make the point. I added a second line. Item, consultation fee, assessment of familial support needs. And a third item, processing fee, emotional toll adjustment. I didn't assign monetary values to those lines. Their presence was the point. They were placeholders for the real cost, the one Mark had ignored. The total at the bottom reflected only the exact amount I had paid Maria. Nothing more, nothing less. I folded the paper neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it to Mark's glossy downtown office address, using his professional name, Mr. Mark Johnson. Let him receive it there amongst the spreadsheets and business proposals. Let it land on his desk as just another bill to be processed until he actually read the sender's name. I didn't seal it immediately. I sat there looking at the envelope, a strange mix of trepidation and resolve swirling within me. This wasn't about the money. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to let his casual dismissal be the final word. It was about saying, I see the value you place on this relationship, on my needs. Here is the invoice. I walked to the mailbox at the end of the drive, the afternoon sun warm on my face. The metallic clang as the envelope dropped inside sounded unnervingly final. There was no going back now. The days that followed were taut with anticipation. Every phone ring made me jump. Every email notification sent a jolt of anxiety through me. What would he do? Would he call, furious? Would he ignore it completely, tossing it aside as a ridiculous menopausal whim? Would he, and this thought was almost laughable, actually pay it? Part of me almost hoped he would ignore it. Silence would be confirmation, wouldn't it? Confirmation that I was so insignificant, my gesture so meaningless that it didn't even warrant a response. That would hurt, but it would be a familiar kind of hurt, the slow ache of neglect I'd grown accustomed to. A confrontation, on the other hand, felt like stepping onto unstable ground. I imagined his voice, smooth and reasonable at first, then tightening with irritation. Mom, what is this? Are you serious? I was trying to help. I paid for a professional service for you, and this is the thanks I get. I could almost hear Chloe, his perfectly put together wife, in the background, murmuring about how stressful this all was for Mark, how I was being unreasonable. I braced myself. I rehearsed my own lines, not lines of anger anymore, but lines of quiet truth. Mark, I needed you, not a service. I needed your time, your presence. Would he hear me, truly hear me? Or would he just hear criticism, complaint, accusation? The call came 3 days later, Tuesday evening. I was washing dishes, staring out the window at the darkening garden when the phone rang, displaying his name. My heart leaped into my throat. I dried my hands slowly, deliberately, letting it ring 3 times before answering, buying myself seconds to gather my composure. Hello, Mark, I said, keeping my voice level. Mom. His voice was tight, strained, no preamble, no pleasantries. I received something in the mail today, at the office. I replied, turning the innocent query into a carefully placed beat. Yes, an invoice. He spat the word out like it tasted foul. An invoice from you, for the woman I hired to help you move. Yes, I said calmly, I paid her for her time, I thought you should have the bill. There was a sharp intake of breath on his end. You thought I should have the bill? Mom, are you losing your mind? I paid for her, I arranged it. It was supposed to be a gesture, I was helping you. Were you, Mark? I asked quietly, the question hanging in the air between us. Were you helping me, or were you solving a problem you didn't want to deal with personally? What is that supposed to mean? He demanded, his voice rising. It means, I said, gripping the edge of the sink, that I asked my son for help because I needed my son. I needed help sorting through memories, Mark, not just lifting boxes. I needed you to be there, and you sent a stranger. I sent a professional, he retorted, exasperated. Someone efficient. I have a job, Mom, demanding clients. I can't just drop everything to pack dusty boxes. I did the next best thing. I made sure you had capable help. Capable help, I repeated softly. Yes, Maria was very capable. She packed everything away very neatly. All the memories, all the history, all the things you didn't have time for. This is unbelievable, Mark sputtered, his voice tight with anger and perhaps a sliver of defensive guilt. I try to do something nice, something practical, and you turn it into this passive-aggressive nonsense. An invoice. Seriously, Mom, what do you want? You want me to feel guilty because I have a successful career? Because I can afford to hire help instead of breaking my back? His words, meant to wound, landed differently this time. They didn't pierce my insecurity, they illuminated his own profound misunderstanding. He genuinely didn't get it. He saw my request through the lens of his own transactional world where time is money and efficiency trumps emotion. He thought practicality was the highest form of care. No, Mark, I said, my voice quiet but firm, the quiet strength finally finding its footing. I don't want you to feel guilty about your success. I've always been proud of you, you know that. What I wanted was for you to see that some things can't be outsourced. Some responsibilities, some connections aren't about efficiency, they're about showing up. I did show up, he insisted. I solved the problem. You solved the logistical problem, I corrected gently. You didn't address the underlying one, the one where your mother felt alone and overwhelmed and just wanted her son's support for a few hours. There was a heavy silence on the line. I could hear his breathing, ragged and frustrated. He was accustomed to winning arguments, to charming or intimidating his way through disagreements. My quiet refusal to be baited, my simple statement of emotional need, seemed to leave him momentarily speechless. So the invoice, he finally said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, is what punishment? A fine for being a bad son? No, Mark, I replied, surprised by my own clarity. It's not punishment, it's information, it's the cost of the service you thought was equivalent to your presence. I paid it, I just thought you should be aware of the price. This is ridiculous, he muttered, but the anger seemed to have deflated slightly, replaced by a kind of weary confusion. What do you expect me to do with this piece of paper? Nothing, I said honestly. Throw it away, frame it, I don't care, sending it was the point. It was for me, Mark. To acknowledge that my feelings, my needs have value, even if you don't see it. He didn't respond immediately. I wondered if anything I said was getting through the layers of ambition and self-importance he wore like armor. Look, Mom, he said eventually, his voice shifting back towards a semblance of practiced patience, the tone he probably used with difficult clients. I'm sorry you're upset. Clearly there was a misunderstanding. I thought I was doing the right thing, the most helpful thing. It was the classic non-apology apology. I'm sorry you feel that way, not I'm sorry I hurt you. Perhaps there was, I conceded, unwilling to let him completely off the hook. But my asking for help wasn't just about the boxes, Mark, I hoped it might be a chance for us to connect. Connect while hauling junk to the garage. The derision was back in his voice. Mom, we connect in other ways. I take you out for nice dinners when I can, I send you gifts. Those things are nice, Mark, I interrupted softly. But they aren't the same as time, as effort, as simply being present. He sighed heavily, a sound of pure frustration. I don't have unlimited time, you know the pressures I'm under. I know, I said. I also know that people make time for what's important to them. The accusation hung there, unspoken but clear. He didn't answer. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distance between us. I have to go, Mom, he said finally, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I have an early meeting. All right, Mark, I replied, equally flat. There was nothing more to say. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Mark. The line clicked dead. I stood there for a long moment, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence. There was no shouting match, no dramatic resolution, just the quiet, painful confirmation of the gap between us. He still didn't understand. Maybe he never would, but I had spoken my truth. I had sent the invoice. I had, in my own quiet way, demanded to be seen. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was overlaid now with something new, a fragile sense of self-possession. I had stood up for myself, not with aggression, but with quiet dignity. The following week, a check arrived in the mail. Not a personal check from Mark, but a crisp, impersonal business check drawn on his company account. It was for the exact amount I had paid Maria. No note, no card, just the check itself, payable to Evelyn Davison. Tucked inside the envelope, almost as an afterthought, was a small, generic thinking of you card, the kind you buy in bulk at a pharmacy. Inside, in Mark's hurried script, was a single line. Hope the rest of the move goes smoothly. That was it, transaction complete. He had paid the invoice, reimbursing the tangible cost while completely ignoring the symbolic lines, the ones about emotional toll and filial duty. It was, in its own way, a perfect encapsulation of our entire exchange. He dealt with the concrete, the quantifiable, the part he could fix with money. The rest, ignored, dismissed, irrelevant. I held the check in my hand, a bitter taste in my mouth. He thought this settled it. He thought paying the money absolved him, closed the account. He still didn't understand that the money was never the point. Did I cash it? Yes, I did. Why not? It was my money, spent covering the cost he'd incurred. Depositing it felt strangely anticlimactic. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement of the transaction he insisted on making this. The card, however, I threw away. Its generic sentiment felt like an insult after everything. Thinking of you, if only. The actual move happened a few days later. Professional movers, hired and paid for by me, efficiently emptied the house. They were polite, strong, and careful with my belongings, but they were strangers. There was no shared history, no reminiscing, just the business of relocation. Mark didn't call. He didn't offer to oversee the movers or help with the inevitable last-minute chaos. Chloe sent a brief text. Thinking of you today, let us know when you're settled. M&C, the corporate sign-off, felt jarringly impersonal. My daughter Sarah called from overseas, full of apologies for not being there, her voice thick with genuine regret. We talked for an hour, her sympathy a soothing balm, though it couldn't erase the sting left by Mark's indifference. Settling into the new apartment was an adjustment. It was smaller, yes, but clean and bright, overlooking a small park. It lacked the deep-rooted history of the old house, the layers of memory embedded in the walls. But it also lacked the heavy weight of expectation, the constant, subtle disappointment associated with Mark's infrequent and unsatisfying visits to the family home. Here, I could start fresh on my own terms. The quiet wasn't the silence of loss anymore, it was beginning to feel like the quiet of peace. One afternoon, about a month after the move, my neighbor from the old cul-de-sac, Martha, called. "Evelyn, dear," she said, her voice warm, "I saw Mark's car at your old house yesterday, and that wife of his. They were there with a big dumpster clearing things out." I frowned. Clearing what out? The movers took everything I designated. Well, Martha hesitated. It looked like mostly things from the attic and the basement. Old boxes, your Richard's workbench things. Looked like they were just tossing most of it. My blood ran cold. The attic and basement. Things I hadn't had the strength or emotional fortitude to sort through completely yet. Things I had specifically told Mark months ago I wanted to go through together when I had more time, more energy. Richard's tools, his meticulously labeled jars of screws and nails, boxes of old papers, maybe even childhood relics I'd stored away. Things Mark had deemed junk, apparently. He hadn't even asked. He just waited until I was gone and then disposed of it quickly, efficiently, like taking out the trash. The final erasure. The invoice, the check, the strained phone call, none of it had mattered. He hadn't learned anything. He had simply waited for the obstacle, me, to be removed, and then completed his task of tidying away the inconvenient remnants of the past. The quiet peace I had started to feel fractured, pierced by a fresh wave of grief and anger. Not just for the lost objects, but for the blatant, callous disregard. He hadn't just outsourced moving boxes, he had outsourced remembering. He had thrown away pieces of our history, pieces of his father, pieces of me without a second thought. And he'd done it behind my back. The bittersweet empowerment I'd felt after sending the invoice curdled into something darker, colder. Reconciliation felt not just unlikely, but impossible. How do you rebuild a bridge with someone who keeps setting fire to your side of it? The revelation about the attic and basement clearance settled heavily within me, a cold, hard knot beneath the surface of my carefully cultivated calm. It wasn't just the loss of the items themselves, though the thought of Richard's workbench being tossed into a dumpster sent waves of nausea through me. It was the finality of Mark's disregard, the calculated manner in which he'd waited, until I was physically removed from the situation to erase parts of our shared past he found inconvenient. He didn't want the burden of those memories, the physical clutter that represented a life he seemed eager to streamline and sanitize. My life, his father's life. It confirmed everything the initial incident with the maid had suggested. His help was never about connection, it was about control and efficient disposal. I didn't call him. What more could be said? Accusations would be met with justifications. "Mom, it was just old junk. We were trying to help get the house ready for sale. You said you didn't want most of it anyway." Deflections designed to make me feel unreasonable, overly sentimental. The gap between us was no longer just a distance. It was a scorched earth landscape cleared by his actions. Instead, I focused on my new space. I unpacked the boxes the movers had brought, the ones Maria had packed, the ones containing the memories I had chosen to keep. I arranged my furniture, hung pictures, including the graduation photo of that younger, smiling Mark, a poignant reminder of a connection that now felt irrevocably altered. Seeing it didn't bring the same warmth, it brought a complex mix of love, sadness, and resignation. This small apartment began to feel less like a downgrade and more like a sanctuary. A place where I was in charge, where my memories were valued, where the quiet was my own. I started volunteering at the local library twice a week, the scent of old paper and the hushed atmosphere strangely comforting. I joined a gentle yoga class, learning to breathe through the stiffness in my joints and the tightness in my chest. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a new life, one defined not by my role as Richard's wife or Mark and Sarah's mother, but by my own quiet interests and choices. The empowerment that had flickered after sending the invoice began to return, not as a flash of defiance, but as a steady internal flame. It wasn't about winning a battle with Mark. It was about recognizing my own worth, independent of his validation. He had sent a maid because he saw my need as a chore. I had sent an invoice because I needed him to understand the cost of his detachment. He had paid the check and thrown out the past because he couldn't face the emotional weight of it. And I was learning to live with the weight, to carry it with grace, and to build something new from the pieces he had discarded. The bitterness remained, a subtle undertone to the sweetness of my newfound independence, but it no longer consumed me. It was simply a part of the complex tapestry of my life, a thread woven in alongside resilience, love, loss, and the quiet, enduring strength of self-worth. The invoice remained unpaid in the ways that truly mattered, but its purpose had been served. It had drawn a line, not just on paper, but within my own heart, a boundary defining where his disregard ended and my self-respect began.